Hi everyone, it's Henry here, and I have been looking forward to doing this video for ages. We're going to be covering one of my favourite Space Marine chapters, the Fleshtearers. I figured it made sense to do this video now given the upcoming Blood Angels release, and the reason I'm so excited to do it is because, for me, I think the Fleshtearers have a very specific red, and I'm sure that will be different to different people, but I know the one I want to try and recreate and see if I can do that for an army painting scheme, and I reckon I've pulled it off, so let me know what you think. Let's paint. As I say, this video was prompted by the new Blood Angels release, and Games Workshop sent us through the army set for review, and last week you may have seen I did the Lamarties video, but this week I thought, right, let's have a look through what's new in the box, and it's this upgrade sprue that the Blood Angels have got now, quite a lot like the Dark Angels got, so you've got bits and bobs on there, lots of moulded shoulder pads, but then a little bit for your Terminators, a few little, you know, doodad, janky little jewellery things, icons, that's the word I'm looking for. And then a couple of really nice weapons, including this ludicrous great eviscerator. So I thought, right, let's use that. Now, when I work on these videos, I tend to do a test model, and then occasionally I'll do a couple of miniatures as I'm going along, just to sort of make sure I get the footage that I need to do them. So in this, we might flip between the two, but the main one I'm going to focus on is the eviscerator model to try and complete for the end of it. And with regards to sub-assemblies, for these guys, because your shoulder pad and your backpack are going to be black, we want to try and leave them off, ideally, and the helmet. And if you've got something like the eviscerator, which is right across the chest, maybe you'll feel more comfortable doing that as a sub-assembly as well. Now, for the pre-shade, we're going to use a paint called Tamiya Flat White. This is a solvent-based acrylic paint, and because of that, we need to use a solvent-based thinner with it, and Tamiya produce something called X20A thinner, which works brilliantly with their acrylics. So that's what we're going to use here. And I've thinned it approximately 4 drops of thinner to 1 drop of paint. Now I'm using our Cult of Paint Harder and Steenbeck Signature Series Infinity here, and what that means is it's got a 0.4mm needle and nozzle in there, and I'm spraying at about 20 to 25 psi. You're going to need to adjust that given whatever situation you're spraying in. And what I'm trying to do here is create quite a stark light and dark situation on the model. By that I mean I want my highlights to be almost bright white, and I want my shadows to be almost pure black. And I don't want there to be too much in between the two, so I don't want it too subtle. I really like doing pre-shades. It really helps me understand the shapes on the model, and particularly with things like Space Marines, you can do an awful lot of work with the paint job at this step, and you're only having to use one paint. And if you muck it up, we'll just spray it black and go again. And I particularly like doing pre-shades for reds because they really, really benefit from having a white underneath them. What it tends to mean is if you want to highlight them, you don't necessarily have to go into pink reds or oranges, some people like to do. You can just put your red over the white, and that will be very, very bright, and then shade down from there. Now, as I said, I think in my mind there's a very specific Fleshtearers red, and I did an awful lot of testers to try and find it, and this is the one I settled on. So I'm using a mix here of Vorbak by Games Workshop and a paint called Burnt Red by Pro Acryl. The Burnt Red by Pro Acryl is quite an old paint. It's from when they very first came on the scene. I assume you can still get it. I assume it's the same paint, but I don't know. That's why, if you're wondering if it's in a smaller bottle, when they first came out, they did the smaller bottles. I think they do the larger ones now. And I've thinned this mix, probably 2 drops of thinner for every drop of the mix at the very least. So it's quite a thin mix. And you see there, I needed to apply 3, 4, 5 coats to get it on there. But I would rather build it up like that so I don't just destroy the pre-shade. And now I want to make sure that our highlights have a bit more of the red in them, so a little bit less of that purpley pink. So I've gone for another mix here. So this is the Burnt Red, but this time with Wazzdakka Red by Games Workshop. And I'm just spraying this onto the areas where I would have sprayed the pure white bits of the pre-shade. So just kind of colouring them in there. You can adjust if you've sort of forgotten an area here or you don't like a shape, you can use this to adjust. But it's a little trickier with red because it's not a particularly strong colour when it's going over itself. But again, it's a fairly dilute mix. All of these mixes I'm erring on the side of too dilute, and I'll then thicken them up. Because it's a fairly dilute mix, a fairly thin mix I should say, there is a risk if you get close, the paint will hit the model and it will spider off. You can see on my thumb there, you can see how thin it is and you can see how easily it spiders off. When that happens, you need to be aware of it. You need a little bit more airbrush control, or you can always lower your pressure a bit, but that might lead to things like blockages and whatnot. So you just adjust to however you like to paint. And this is an airbrush heavy video. There's no two ways about it. I don't know of a colour out of the can that looks like this. So I want to try and do plenty of videos for you guys where there's still interesting stuff in it, even if you don't own an airbrush. But this is one where if you do want to replicate this exactly, an airbrush is going to help you an awful lot. And the final thing we're doing for the armour here with the acrylics is a mix of the Vorbak and black. Any black you like, doesn't matter. And I haven't done a ratio because I just put a dot of black in the mix just to darken it down. And again, thinned it right down, almost sort of similar consistency as a typical wash like your Agrax or something. And this I'm using just to spray into the shadows, just to bring back some of those shapes that I might have sort of messed up with the previous layers of spraying. And also just to bring in a nice additional tone in that middle area between the dark and the mid-tone. Now I'm going to move on to an oil wash. For this, I'm using black, and this brand is Absalon 502. Use whatever brand you like. Ideally, you know, a good quality brand, something like Winsor Newton Artist Oil Colour. They're my favourite ones to use. I just can't find my black for that. And I'm thinning it down using just normal DIY store mineral spirits here. Start 50-50 and then adjust from there. You don't want to add too much thinner or your oil paint will start splitting out and stuff like that. So I wanted a fairly thick wash here. I'll show you on the sprue in a second so you can see. And this is because I kind of want it to stay where I put it, because I'm not going to varnish the model before I'm doing this. Nothing to do with protecting the paint, but I'm not going to varnish the model because what I don't want it to do is just get sucked completely and stay in the recess. I wanted this to slightly stain the areas around the recesses. I'll show you why in a second. Now for the video, I say I'm just using a DIY store mineral spirit. It's because it evaporates quickly, which means it's great for filming with, but it absolutely stinks. So you need plenty of ventilation. If I'm working on a project for myself, I tend to use an odorless artist grade mineral spirit. I use Sansador by Winsor Newton, but lots of different people make them. So, you know, just adjust for yourself. And here you can see me doing a load more. This is a much thinner oil wash actually. So this is a video I've been doing over on Patreon where I'm painting up a Spyro gang for Necromunda. I just wanted to say a huge thank you to those of you that support us on Patreon. It makes an enormous difference to us. It allows myself and Andy to be full-time, to create videos for YouTube each week and for Patreon each week, and to do all the other projects like the MPO, the miniatures ranges, the paint, all of that sort of stuff. So we hugely appreciate your support over there. There's also been new podcasts we've been working on, and I think we're going to do the first sort of public episode of that this week with any luck. But we've been trying it out on there first as well. And if for any reason you can't support us on Patreon, then your likes, subscribes and comments over here on YouTube make a huge difference as well. So thank you very much for all of that support. We really mean it. You know, you guys keep us going. So I've left the oil on there to dry for as long as it took me to make and drink a cup of tea. And now I'm going back with a soft, dry brush, and I'm just going to kind of buff and blend that oil towards the areas of shadow. If it's not moving with the dry brush, then I pop the brush into a little bit of clean mineral spirit, wipe off the vast majority of it so it's not wet really, it's just ever so slightly damp with the spirit. Acts like an eraser then. And then I can just start cleaning it up. So here I'm looking to clean it up off any surfaces where I don't want it, but also, as I say, kind of buff and blend it out in the areas of shadow on the miniature. So I think it adds this lovely sort of gritty, dark, kind of grimy look to them. And it's very simple to do. But as you can see, it's always quite controlled. I'm not just slapping everything over the miniature and then removing loads and fiddling around. This is just all quite gentle, quite controlled, and very easy to do in steps, you know. Now, for the black elements of the model, I'm base coating them black. Use whatever you like. I'm using Vallejo model color black here. And even though I've primed black, I like to give them a base coat of normal black paint. Just means if you need to do any touch-ups, it's easy to match it. And I'm going to go for one very simple highlight with the airbrush here. This is Eshin Grey by Games Workshop. Again, simple, thinking about the shapes. If it's a sphere, like the little bits on the ends, then we do a spherical highlight. If it's the top of the backpack, then we do a cylindrical highlight along it. We just kind of follow those shapes. Same for the helmet, that sort of thing. Nice and simple. We're not looking to show off with our airbrush here at all. It's just to put a little bit of light onto the miniature itself. The dilution here is about 2 drops of thinner to 1 drop of paint. And I'm always using Vallejo thinner at the moment because that's the one I've got, unless I say otherwise. And then I'm going to prepare the model for decals. So I'm using a gloss varnish. I use Vallejo polyurethane gloss, have done for years. I know how it works. That's the only reason really. I buy in big bottles, so I know what I'm doing. So yeah, decals. Little admission here. I panicked at the weekend because I couldn't find my Fleshtearers decals. Messaged my mate Liam, who's a huge Fleshtearers fan, one of my oldest hobby chums. He very kindly posted some out to me. And as I was popping the box in the recycling, I noticed you get a new decal sheet in the Blood Angels Army set, which has a load of Fleshtearers decals on it, and Angels Sanguine and Angels Encarmine, which is really, really cool. So even though it's called the Death Company sheet, it's got a bunch of successor chapter stuff on there. So thanks, Liam. I really appreciate it, mate. But as it was, I didn't need it. Turned out I was sat on a load of them. And I'm guessing there's going to be lots of bartering for these different successor chapters now, because they're all really, really exciting to paint, I think, and really, really interesting. And then once the decals are all done, and I'll link up to a video dedicated to doing decals, we're just going to give the armour its final varnish finish. So for this, I'm doing a 50-50 mix of matte and ultra matte. It just gives it a nice sort of, well, it's a finish I like to the armour. I'm not going to do any more varnishing after that. Now I want to move on and do some chipping / highlighting. I think Fleshtearers, in fact any Marines I paint, I will do battle damage on, but I think Fleshtearers, it's, in my mind anyway, they definitely have tons of scratches and stuff on them because they're always getting stuck in, right? So the first one I'm going to colour I'm going to use here is the Wazzdakka Red. Now I've got this on my wet palette, and I'm just really slowly, really relaxed, working my way around the entire model, just doing these little tippy-tappy chips along the edges, the odd scratch. There's not really any trick to this. It's just getting comfortable. It's getting a brush that maintains a nice point on it, and it's getting a dilution on your wet palette that you're happy to work with. So not too thick, so it comes off the brush easy, and not too thin that it floods all over the place. And just relax, get yourself comfortable. And for the final highlight, I wanted to mix in a little bit of a sort of orangey flesh colour. I've chosen flat flesh here by Vallejo model colour. Doesn't really matter what the brand is, whatever. It's that type of colour we're going for. So that's slightly more orangey flesh colour. So I think Cadian probably would work fairly well. Yeah, probably would. But that was the one I saw in my bag of paints of that colour. And now exactly the same process, but I'm covering a smaller area. And generally I'm going to put these chips roughly where they line up with where I've put my airbrush highlights as well. So I kind of, the areas that are going to draw attention, that are going to get the most light on them. So the collar, the knee that's facing forward there, the hip plates, that type of thing. So whilst this may look laborious, I mean, I love doing it. It's one of my favourite things to do with painting, full stop, is chipping armour. But I find it very relaxing. And actually, when you're in the groove, it does not take that long to do, particularly on a Marine. On a nice simple armour shape like this, it doesn't take too long. And then for the black parts, if I've got a decal over it, then I'm just doing a bit of black first as a chip, just to help sort of set that image into the armour like it's been painted on. And then I'm going to use Eshin Grey. I'm sponge chipping to start with here, actually, the Eshin Grey. I absolutely could have started to sponge chip on the red armour as well. To be honest with you, I was just enjoying painting the model, so I just did it with my brush instead. But sponge is a great way to start out with these as well. And his chest eagle as well, we're going to do the same way, so Eshin. And then I do end up mixing in a little Dawnstone for a couple of those lighter chips as well. It's just a combo of greys I like using. Is Eshin and Dawnstone. If you have a particular combo you like, then use those. There's not much else on this model, but there is a little leather belt. So I've done a very simple recipe on here, because again, for me, army painting, it just means simplifying things where possible, but still taking care. And I've used Rhinox Hide, and then I've used Steel Legion Drab to add some little scratchy highlights to it, but mega simple. If this was a character model, I'd probably add a mix in there in the middle, and do a few more scratches, or maybe even a different colour, maybe something like Mornfang and then Steel Legion. But for a line trooper, I think it's absolutely fine. And then we're nearly at the end of the model. So the other details, so there's obviously going to be metal on them. Use whatever metal mix you're comfortable using. I would say it really doesn't matter. My favourite currently is a 50-50 mix of burnt iron and iron warriors. I like the properties of the burnt iron paint, and I like the properties of the Iron Warriors paint, and mixed together, they're perfect. It's just fluid enough. It covers in one pass. Lovely, lovely. And then I use watered down Ratling Grime as my silver wash most of the time, when it's like a, sort of kind of an industrial type metal, steel. It's a contrast paint, but you water it down and you're absolutely fine. And then I felt like green eyes would look good on these guys. So I've chosen a nice, simple, again, sort of go-to recipe I use, which is Incubi Darkness, Kabalite Green, and Moot Green. And I've almost managed to keep the entire of this shot in focus, which I'm rather proud of. And I've kind of gone for the classic eye lens look with this one. So we kind of make it lighter towards the middle of the face, so lighter towards the nose, and then the bottom edge of the lens. And then we pop a little white dot in. To be honest with you, I prefer doing it the way I've done in some other marine videos that looks weirder, but it takes way longer. And is way more difficult, and I haven't done it that often. So I think next time I do a bigger marine project, I will endeavour to do that, so I've got a bit better muscle memory and stuff for doing that style of lens. But this classic way of doing the lenses I love. I think it's fab, isn't it? And the green against the black I think looks lovely, and I think it looks great against the red as well. I do really like the Primaris lids. They do have a cool look to them. And then obviously didn't get the white dot first time. You can almost see it on the thing. The white has dried on the tip of my brush. Just happens with filming all the time. The lights and all the rest of it. But again, just take your time. And if you're really nervous about doing this bit, use like a cocktail stick or use a safety pin or something like that to do your white dots. Nothing wrong with that. No such thing as cheating. So here he is, like pretty much done. But I just wanted to go in and do a couple of final stages on him just to help elevate him a touch further. Incidentally, this is the minimum amount of weathering I would do on the miniature. Obviously, adjust it to your taste, but I'd love to go a bit further than that with this guy. So I'm going in here with a brown. I think it was the Rhinox Hide that was on my palette. Maybe it was a brown anyway. It doesn't really matter. When I'm chipping red armor, a dark brown or I think a dark grey also looks fantastic on red. If I had a dark grey to hand, I'd have probably just used that, but I didn't. I had some brown on my palette, so I used that instead. And just doing much fewer chips with the brown, but particularly over things like the decals. I think it helps loads, the white. And then back with a nice bright silver, just doing a handful of real, just like, 10 chips maybe on the whole model. I think it's more impactful if you just do them in very sparingly like that, just to represent sort of super fresh chips. I know some people don't think Power Armour's got metallic chips, that's fine, so don't do these. I think it looks cool, so I put it on. And then obviously on the metal as well. And because I like using them, thought we'd use a little bit of oil paint at the end as well. So here I'm using a brown. This is Raw Umber by Winsor Newton. A thinner mix than I did with the black, because I am going to use this as a bit more of a filter, by which I mean I'm going to cover larger areas and I just kind of want to tint what's underneath it, just make it look a little bit grubby. And then when it collects in the recesses, it will be more opaque anyway and will look like dirt and grime. I'm always using a synthetic brush here when I'm mixing my oil up. And then when I'm applying my oil, often I'm using an old natural hair brush that's no longer holds a point perhaps well enough for normal painting, but it's still decent for doing my oils with. So as I say, I'm just going to run this in a few different areas, all over the metals and the decals and stuff. Again, you do not need to worry about oil paint and mineral spirits messing up your acrylic paint. You don't need to be varnishing over anything. Yes, this has a matte varnish, but it's a thin airbrushed layer of matte varnish. It's doing naff all to actually protect anything, but you don't need to. You're not protecting it from anything. If you've experienced in the past where you've put oil or mineral spirits on your acrylics and then you've done stuff and it's took the paint off, either your acrylic paint hasn't been dry, or more likely you're putting too much force on the model when you're removing that oil paint. So maybe you're using a cotton bud or something like that to remove it, and simply that pressure is what's taking the paint off the miniature. It's nothing to do with the oils or anything like that. Raw Umber's a lovely colour. Really, really recommend picking that one up if you're sort of on the fence about oils. I'll link up a video as well actually about working with them. But yeah, like a brown, a black, and like an orangey colour, always worth having in your toolbox, because you're going to use those on most miniatures, or I certainly use them on most miniatures that I paint. And for his basing, I've just done our usual YouTube style basing, which I'll pop a link up to as well. So here we go. He's all finished. I really, really like how it's come out. I think it's very, very simple and easy to replicate. There's very, very few colours as well. It's very, very few paints for this. If you do have a go at this scheme, I hope you like it, and you do an army, I would love for you to let me know. Either email us some pics or tag us if you're on social media. I'd love to see how it looks over it. If I was into my 40k more at the minute, I would be very, very, very tempted. Liam, I know you're always, a heartbeat away from doing another Fleshtearers project. I would love to see it if you have a go at this, particularly those awesome converted ones you've done. But yeah, I couldn't be more happy with how this red's come out. As I said, had it in my head for years. So really glad we got to do the video. So I hope you've enjoyed the last couple of weeks. A bit more Blood Angels stuff. I think I may as well do a Blood Angels playlist on YouTube now. The amount of different things we've done between Heresy and 40k for them. We've got airbrush. I think we've got some brush painted versions. A bunch of different reds. So yeah, you can tell we enjoy painting them. But if you've got any questions at all about anything I've done in the video, just let me know down in the comments and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Thanks ever so much for all of your support. Take care, and I'll see you next time. If you've liked any of the models in this video and you fancy having an army of them yourself, but perhaps you don't have the time or wherewithal to get it done, consider dropping us an email at commissions@cultofpaint.com and maybe Ben can sort you out.